The most powerful man in post-war Europe wasn't a politician or a general. He was a banker with a secret police file. In the shattered landscape of 1945, as nations scrambled for reconstruction, one man sat at the nexus of American money, European governments, and clandestine intelligence networks. His name was Hermann J. Abs, and his decisions at Deutsche Bank moved over $12 billion in today's money, shaping the fate of 3 nations from behind a ledger. This isn't a story of simple finance. This is the story of how real power operates in the shadows of catastrophe. The old world had burned. In the ashes, new empires are built by quiet men. Germany was occupied, divided, and economically obliterated. Its industrial heart had stopped beating. The Allies were determined to dismantle the very machinery of German industry, the conglomerates like IG Farben that fueled the Nazi war machine. Denazification was the public order, but in the smoky backrooms of Washington and London, a cold calculation was being made. A revived West Germany was now seen as the essential bulwark against the Soviet Union, and for that, you needed its economy. You needed its bankers. Enter Hermann Abs. He was the ultimate insider who survived the outside. Survival is the first form of power. Abs wasn't just any banker. By 1945, he was on the board of 44 different companies, a central node in the web of German capital. Officially, he had no Nazi Party membership, a crucial detail. Unofficially, he had facilitated foreign currency transactions for the Third Reich. The British arrested him. Then they quietly released him. Because Hermann Abs had a photographic memory of every industrial asset, every debt, every corporate relationship in Germany. He knew where the bodies were buried, and more importantly, he knew where the money could be dug up. The Allies needed a magician to perform financial triage, and they handed him the scalpel. In 1948, he was appointed the leading financial advisor to the German authorities for the Marshall Plan. The United States was pumping billions into Europe. Someone had to decide which German companies got the lifeblood of credit to resurrect and which would be left to die. That someone was Abs. He chaired the Saarbrückenes Kreditanstalt für Wiederaufbau, the Reconstruction Credit Institute. Every major loan to rebuild Germany's steel, coal, and chemical industries crossed his desk. With a stroke of his pen, he could determine the economic fate of cities. He wasn't just rebuilding Germany, he was redesigning it. Control the debt, and you control the future. This is where the first government fell under his influence, his own, the nascent West Germany. Chancellor Konrad Adenauer relied on him absolutely. Abs negotiated the pivotal London Debt Agreement of 1953. He sat across from global creditors and convinced them to slash Germany's pre-war and post-war debt by 50%. It was the single greatest act of debt forgiveness in modern history. It unleashed the Wirtschaftswunder, the German economic miracle. The public saw a miracle. The insiders saw a master negotiator who had just liberated his nation's balance sheet. His power was now untouchable, but his influence leaked across borders. A banker's loyalty is to the system, not the flag. The second government was in London. In the late 1950s, Deutsche Bank, under Abs's leadership as chairman of the board of managing directors, began aggressively financing international trade. He cultivated deep ties with the Bank of England and the British financial aristocracy. When Britain needed stable, powerful European partners to navigate the end of its empire and volatile sterling crises, it turned to the network Abs embodied. He became a trusted conduit, a man who could whisper to Bonn and reassure London simultaneously. The third government, however, was the most shocking, because it was in Moscow. This is the hidden hinge of the Cold War. The deepest connections are often invisible. Throughout the 1960s and 70s, while the public faced the stark imagery of the Berlin Wall, Hermann Abs and Deutsche Bank were quietly financing massive pipeline deals between the Soviet Union and Western Europe. He facilitated the sale of Soviet natural gas to Germany, building infrastructure that created a mutual dependency that outlasted political rhetoric. The KGB files on him were extensive, not because he was an enemy, but because he was a critical channel. He spoke the language of capital, which both East and West understood. He helped broker the trade that kept detente alive, making his bank, and himself, indispensable to the Kremlin's hard currency needs. The $12 billion wasn't a single transaction. It was the gravitational pull of his decisions over decades. Money flows where trust is built in shadows. He moved capital that rebuilt a continent indebted nations to each other, and wired the Cold War enemies together with economic circuitry. He proved that the man who commands the mechanisms of credit commands more than armies. He shapes realities. He didn't control governments by decree, but by dependency. By being the only one who could solve impossible financial problems, he made his influence inescapable. So what is the actionable truth buried in this history? Patterns repeat, only the names change. Today the landscape is digital, the currencies are crypto and central bank digital currencies, and the crises are pandemics and supply chain collapses. But the principle remains. In every major disruption, a new class of financial architects emerges. They operate at the intersection of public crisis and private capital. They are the negotiators of sovereign debt, the allocators of rescue funds, the builders of the new infrastructure. They gain quiet, unprecedented influence by knowing where the money must flow and controlling the valves. Your world is being shaped by them right now. The question is not who holds the office, but who holds the ledger. Look at the aftermath of 2008. Look at the pandemic stimulus. Look at the rebuilding of Ukraine. In every case, a small consortium of banks, asset managers, and unelected advisors determines the allocation of trillions. They become the gateway. This is the perpetual lesson. In the chaotic interregnum between one order and the next, power doesn't disappear. It condenses. It flows to the intermediaries who can navigate the chaos, who have the memory, the connections, and the cold pragmatism to build the next system. Don't look for the conspiracy. Look for the confluence of interest and crisis. Then you will see the modern architects. Understand that the most powerful forces are never wholly public nor wholly private. They exist in the hybrid space, in the public-private partnerships, the sovereign wealth fund deals, the debt-for-nature swaps, the digital currency platforms. To navigate this world, you must think like Abs. You must see the system as a web of obligations and dependencies. You must identify the critical choke points of capital and information. Your protection and your opportunity lies in understanding that finance is never just finance. It is the underlying grammar of power. The spy banker is gone, but his blueprint is eternal. The quietest men in the room are still drawing the maps, and so we arrive at the modern translation of the blueprint. The tools have changed, the playbook has not. The $12 billion that moved through Hermann Abs' hands was a physical instrument of power. Steel mills, coal mines, pipeline steel. Today, the equivalent movements are digital, instantaneous, and often opaque. They are the quantitative easing programs post-2008 that created over $25 trillion in new money globally. They are the pandemic stimulus packages, like the $2.2 trillion CARES Act in the U.S., dispersed through a handful of megabanks. They are the sovereign wealth funds moving trillion-dollar portfolios. The scale has multiplied, but the concentration of gatekeeping power has only intensified. The new spy bankers don't work from paneled offices in Frankfurt. They operate from Silicon Valley and Shanghai. They are the architects of digital payment systems, the algorithmic traders, the creators of central bank digital currency protocols. Their weapon isn't a loan agreement. It's a blockchain, a trading API, a social credit scoring system integrated with digital finance. In 2021, the People's Bank of China advanced its digital currency electronic payment (DCE) system, a tool that allows for unprecedented transaction surveillance and capital control. Who builds the infrastructure? Who has the backdoor access? The influence is baked into the code. This is the modern control of three governments. It's happening in your pocket. The first government is, again, the visible state. The U.S. Treasury, the ECB, the Bank of Japan. They are more dependent than ever on private financial entities to execute their grand designs. When the Federal Reserve launched the Paycheck Protection Program, it was a few giant banks that became the arbiters of survival for millions of small businesses. They controlled the spigot. They decided who lived and who died financially. That is raw, Abs-like power delegated in a crisis. But the second government is the supranational entity. The real authority transcends borders. Look at the Bank for International Settlements, BIS, the so-called Central Bank for Central Banks. It sets the standards, Basel Accords, capital requirements that dictate the behavior of every major financial institution on the planet. Its committees are filled with former and future private sector bankers. It's a nexus where regulators and the regulated merge, deciding the rules of the game in closed-door meetings in Basel, Switzerland. This is where the modern Hermann Abs network congregates, shaping global liquidity without a single vote from the public. The third government is the most abstract and the most powerful, the market itself. a sovereign entity with its own laws and enforcers. This is the government of bond vigilantes, of credit rating agencies, of ESG scoring systems. In 2012, it forced the hand of the European Central Bank when Mario Draghi promised to do whatever it takes to save the euro. The market dictated the policy. Today, a downgrade by Moody's or S&P can cripple a nation's ability to borrow. A change in Apple's or BlackRock's ESG criteria can redirect hundreds of billions in capital, forcing corporate and national policy shifts. This government has no capital, but it is the ultimate arbiter. And the $12 billion moves, now it moves in nanoseconds. The velocity conceals the control. The actionable insight for you is not to follow the news headlines, it is to follow the capital flows and the infrastructure being built. Just as Abs positioned himself at the choke point of Marshall Plan Reconstruction, the next generation of power is positioning itself at the choke points of the digital financial rebuild. They are in companies building CBDC platforms, in firms managing sovereign debt restructurings for collapsing economies, in consultancies designing the carbon credit markets. You must think in terms of systems, not stocks. Identify the new Deutsche Banks. They might be traditional institutions like BlackRock with its $10 trillion in assets under management and its Aladdin risk management system that acts as the central nervous system for a vast swath of the financial world. They might be tech giants like Amazon, weaving payment and lending directly into the fabric of commerce. They might be crypto-native entities like the consortiums governing major stablecoins, which could become the plumbing for a new international monetary system. Your survival and leverage depend on this understanding. Don't fear the system. Decode it. When the next crisis hits, a sovereign debt collapse, a climate-related financial shock, a digital bank run, watch not for the politicians at the podium, but for the small group of advisors summoned to the emergency meetings. They will be the ones drafting the bailout terms, the debt swaps, the new digital liquidity facilities. They will gain quiet, enduring influence by, once again, being the only ones who can solve the problem. Their reward will be a deeper integration into the architecture of the next system. This is the recurring cycle of power: crisis, delegation, consolidation. The architect always emerges from the rubble. So, what do? You diversify not just your assets, but your understanding. You allocate a portion of your attention to the plumbing, the payment systems, the monetary protocols, the regulatory proposals. You recognize that the most important political decisions of the 21st century are being made in financial language. Learn the language, see the networks. The individual spy banker is a relic. Today, the function is distributed across a techno-financial priesthood, but their goal is the same as Abs's: to build the channels through which all capital must flow and to stand guard at the gate. The gate is now digital, and you are already inside its walls. If you learned something new today, hit subscribe. There's always more history waiting to be uncovered here on Econ Prime.